a profile of just boundless energy. That's really how everyone knew Katie Sepich.
Right. She was 22, a grad student at New Mexico State, super intelligent.
Her dad called her a ball of fire.
Yeah, and that fire, that incredible potential was just violently extinguished in 2003.
It was Labor Day weekend. Katie and her boyfriend Joe were at a party, and, well, things go south.
She catches him kissing another woman. They have a big fight, and Katie storms out. It's around 3 a.m.
She's only a few blocks from her own apartment, but she leaves everything. Her keys, her phone, her purse, everything.
And she never makes it home.
By 11 a.m., hunters find her body near an old dump site.
It was a horrific scene. She had been raped, strangled, and then set on fire. A clear attempt to destroy any evidence.
But the attempt failed.
It absolutely failed. Detectives confirmed it immediately. They had high-quality, undeniable DNA evidence right from the scene. They had the killer's biological signature.
Okay, so that brings us to the core, just agonizing question we're looking at today. They had the killer's DNA.
A perfect sample.
And yet, it takes law enforcement more than 3 years, until December 2006, to put a name to that profile. Gabriel Avila.
And the reason for that delay, it wasn't bad science. It wasn't even bad police work. It was a failure of the law itself.
Because just 3 months after he murdered Katie, Avila was arrested for another serious felony.
He was. But at the time, in New Mexico and most other states, the law said you could only take DNA upon conviction.
Not upon arrest.
Exactly. So his DNA wasn't taken, it wasn't put into the system, and a violent murderer was just allowed to walk free.
So today, we're going to trace that single, devastating loophole. We'll follow the incredible fight waged by Katie's parents, and then we'll get into the landmark Supreme Court case that completely changed American policing.
And through it all, we have to look at this critical balance. Public safety on one side, and, our fundamental Fourth Amendment rights on the other.
So when the investigation starts in 2003, all that horror is immediately complicated by the focus on Katie's boyfriend, Joe.
And, you can understand why they focused on him. It's frustrating in hindsight, but at the time...
He was the last person to see her alive.
Right. He admitted to a huge fight, and then his behavior was just deeply suspicious. He didn't even report her missing.
And then he flees. Just days after the murder, he drives 300 miles away from Las Cruces. Says he needs to clear his head.
And the big one, he absolutely refused to give a voluntary DNA sample.
Yeah, that's a huge red flag. When your prime suspect in a rape and murder case won't cooperate with that, the bias just locks in.
It does. I mean, detectives were spending so many resources on him. They were trying to match tire tracks to his car, staking out Katie's grave.
Just hoping he'd say something incriminating.
For months, the whole investigation was just focused on Joe. It didn't move forward at all until they finally got a warrant.
Gonna get his DNA that way.
They get it from samples they collected in Katie's bedroom, probably from her personal items. They run the tests, and the result is definitive.
He's not a match.
Not a match at all. Joe was completely exonerated.
Just think about the time they lost. One of the detectives, Mark Mears, talked about it later. How much time was wasted? Because Joe wouldn't cooperate, because his story kept changing.
Every single day they spent on him was another day the real killer was free.
And that killer was Gabriel Avila.
Avila was a local guy, had a record, and he eventually confessed to everything. He said he was leaving his drug dealer's house early that morning, and he almost hit Katie with his truck.
He offers her a ride.
Which she refuses at first, but then, just moments later, he sees her again. She's locked out of her own apartment, trying to climb in through a window because she left her keys at the party.
The randomness of it is it's devastating.
Avila said he just lost it. He attacked her, raped her, strangled her, and then drove her body out to that dump site and tried to burn the evidence. The detective said the odds of their paths crossing like that were just astronomical.
30 seconds earlier, 30 seconds later.
And she'd still be alive.
Okay, so let's look at that timeline again, at that legal gap. Katie is murdered in the summer of 2003.
And just 3 months later, in the fall of 2003, Gabriel Avila is arrested for aggravated burglary.
And we should be clear, this wasn't some minor crime.
No, not at all. Aggravated burglary. He broke into the home of 2 women armed with a knife after he'd been watching them through their window.
It's a clear escalation. Predatory behavior. Exactly the kind of person you need to identify.
He's convicted pretty quickly in 2004, so he's in the system. Police have him, they book him, photograph him, fingerprint him.
But they do not take a cheek swab.
That's the whole story right there. New Mexico law said DNA collection only happens upon conviction and then commitment to prison, not upon arrest.
But wait, it gets worse. He's convicted in 2004, and then he just disappears.
He absconds. He skips out on his sentencing and is on the run for a full year. A convicted, violent felon.
That's horrifying.
It is. He's not caught and finally sent to prison until 2005. And it's only then, during the prison intake process, that his DNA sample is finally taken.
And it gets uploaded to the national database, CODIS,
And then they wait.
until December 2006.
That's when the cold hit comes through. The system finally links Gabriel Avila's profile to the DNA found on Katie Sepich's body, 3 full years after the murder.
And for most of that time, a known rapist and murderer was, as the prosecutor said, just roaming the streets.
That knowledge, the fact that one simple, painless cheek swab at his 2003 arrest could have solved the case almost instantly.
It must have been just crushing for the Sepich family.
It was the catalyst for everything that came next. The case finally ends in May 2007. Avila pleads guilty to first-degree murder, rape, kidnapping, tampering with evidence. He gets 69 years.
And it's worth noting the DA at the time, Susana Martinez, decided not to seek the death penalty. Katie's father supported that decision.
He did, and it's because of the painful reality of capital cases. They can drag on for decades with appeals and reversals.
And for a family that's been through so much, the idea of immediate closure.
It's everything. Dave Sepich called the DNA evidence a mighty bargaining chip. That certainty of a 69-year sentence, knowing Avila was gone for good, that was the finality they needed.
But the real takeaway here is the flaw in the system. A system designed to fight crime was completely handcuffed by a 20th century legal rule.
You know, the Sepich family could have just taken that closure and tried to heal, but they didn't. Their grief turned into this incredibly powerful advocacy.
They were just horrified by the systemic failure. They find out this legal gap that let Avila walk free existed in 45 states.
And Katie, their mom, Jayanne, she becomes this one-woman research engine. She starts digging into DNA laws all over the country.
Finds that conviction-based collection is standard, but only 5 states at the time allowed collection upon felony arrest.
And she knew she needed more than just Katie's story to make the case for this huge change. She needed to show the cost of not collecting DNA early.
And she finds this absolutely chilling precedent in California, the case of Chester Dwayne Turner.
The Turner case is just. It's essential to understanding the urgency here. Turner was arrested 21 times.
21 separate times on felony charges. Assault with a deadly weapon, things like that.
And it was only after that 21st arrest that his DNA was finally taken.
And what happens?
It immediately links him to 12 rape and murder victims. 12. Had the system taken his DNA after his first felony arrest back in 1987?
11 of those women might still be alive today.
That statistic became the moral foundation for their fight. This wasn't about punishing arrestees. It was about saving future victims.
So they start at home in New Mexico. They get Katie's Law passed, which mandates DNA collection for anyone 18 or older arrested for a felony.
But they knew that wasn't enough. Criminals cross state lines. A crime in New Mexico might be solved by an arrest in Texas.
You need a national interoperable system. You need CODIS to work everywhere.
Which leads them to push for federal legislation. And the Katie Sepich Enhanced DNA Collection Act of 2010 is, it's a brilliant piece of political strategy.
Because it doesn't force states to do anything. It doesn't penalize them.
It incentivizes them. It uses money.
Let's break that down. The federal government uses this huge funding pool, the Burn Jag program, which states rely on for their criminal justice budgets.
Right. It's the biggest source of federal money for local law enforcement. So instead of threatening to cut it, the Sepich Act offered a bonus, a carrot, not a stick.
It created a tiered system.
Exactly. If your state adopted a minimum process-taking DNA for serious crimes like murder and rape, you got a 5% bonus on your Burn Jag funds.
And if you went further and adopted an enhanced process covering a much broader list of felonies,
you got a 10% bonus. And for some states, that's millions of dollars.
It's brilliant because it overcomes the biggest hurdle, which is cost.
For sure. Implementing a program like this is expensive. Georgia said it would cost them something like $7 million a year for the kits, the lab work, all of it.
So the federal bonus wasn't just an incentive, it was the funding to actually make it possible.
And you had bipartisan support. President Obama backed it, saying, criminals cross state lines, so our databases have to talk to each other, just common sense.
This whole strategy, this shift from a few states to a national, federally incentivized push, it completely changed the landscape.
It laid all the groundwork for the biggest challenge that was still to come, the constitutional test.
Right. The second these laws started getting passed, the legal challenges just piled up.
And the argument was pretty straightforward. The Fourth Amendment protects us from unreasonable search and seizure.
So how can the government take your DNA, your entire biological blueprint, when you've only been arrested, not convicted?
That was the tightrope. Because police have probable cause to arrest you for one crime, but swabbing your cheek is a search for evidence of all other crimes. And that felt very different.
The question finally hits the Supreme Court in 2013 with Maryland v. King.
The case involved a man named Alonzo King. He's arrested in Maryland for assault. They swab his cheek at booking, and that DNA sample matches an unsolved 2003 rape case.
He gets convicted for the rape, but he argues the whole thing started with an illegal search, a violation of his Fourth Amendment rights.
And the Supreme Court upholds the Maryland law, but it was incredibly close, a 5-4 decision.
So how did the majority, led by Justice Kennedy, justify it? How do you equate DNA with something like fingerprinting?
Well, that's exactly what he did. Kennedy argued that a cheek swab is minimally invasive. But more importantly, he said that when it's used for identification, it serves a legitimate police administrative function.
Just like taking a photo or rolling fingerprints.
Precisely. He famously called DNA the fingerprint of the 21st century.
So the argument is that law enforcement needs to know exactly who they have in custody.
Right. For two main reasons. First, for administrative purposes. Knowing someone's full criminal history is critical for setting bail, assessing flight risk. If the guy you just arrested for assault is actually a serial rapist from another state, you need to know that before you let him out.
And then the second reason?
It was all about the science. Kennedy leaned heavily on the details of how CODIS works.
Okay, let's get into that, because this is how they tried to address the privacy concerns.
The DNA collected for CODIS is what they call junk DNA. It doesn't code your full genome. It only looks at 13 specific regions or loci that are highly variable between people but don't contain sensitive genetic information.
So it's not looking for your predisposition to a disease or your ancestry.
No, it just creates a unique 52-digit numerical code that identifies you, and only you, unless you have an identical twin. The majority argued that this protects privacy. They're only searching the ID number, not your genetic secrets.
So that's the majority's case. A minimal search for a massive public safety benefit. But a 5-4 decision means the dissent was incredibly strong.
Oh, it was scathing. Justice Scalia wrote the dissent, and he basically said the majority had just shredded the Fourth Amendment.
What was his core argument?
His point was that a search is meant to find evidence of the crime you were just arrested for, but the DNA search isn't for that at all.
Right, it's a search for evidence of caste crimes, unrelated crimes.
Exactly. Scalia wrote that it's a violation to search someone without a warrant just to see if they've committed any crime anywhere at any time. He said the majority was calling a search an identification measure to get around the Fourth Amendment.
That's a profound distinction. If the government can search you for unrelated crimes just because you're in custody, where does that power stop?
That's the exact point legal scholars like Tracy Macklin made. He compared King to the landmark case Terry v. Ohio,
which allowed police to stop and frisk someone based on reasonable suspicion, a much lower standard than probable cause.
Right. Both cases use this balancing test weighing government interests against individual privacy. And Macklin's warning is that when the court uses that balancing act to approve searches that aren't tied to probable cause, it's a very slippery slope.
So the logic in King could be used to justify other kinds of searches in the future.
It could. It's hard to limit. The decision was a huge victory for law enforcement and for the Sepich family's cause, but it also marks this profound, maybe permanent shift in how we interpret the Fourth Amendment.
So with that constitutional green light, the impact on actual crime solving was, it was immediate.
And it all revolves around CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System.
That's the FBI's national database. It's the engine that connects a crime scene sample in one state to an arrestee profile in another.
And as soon as states started implementing these arrestee collection laws, the number of profiles in CODIS just exploded.
It created a cold case revelation.
You see it right away in New Mexico.
Yeah.
After Katie's law passed, the Santa Fe Police Department was able to go back through their evidence freezer. They had 318 confirmed cold cases just waiting.
And now they could run all that old evidence against this massive new pool of arrestee DNA.
And they started getting hits, getting leads on cases that had been dead for years.
The statistics that came out after this are just staggering. They really quantify how many crimes could have been prevented.
The Chicago study is probably the most powerful example. Researchers looked at just 8 known violent criminals, and they calculated what would have happened if DNA had been taken at their very first felony arrest.
And for just those 8 people.
Their early DNA collection could have prevented 60 violent crimes.
60.
Including 53 murders and 7 rapes. All of those crimes happened simply because of the delay built into the old system.
And we see similar findings in other studies, right?
Yeah, a Maryland study looked at 3 offenders and found the same thing. Multiple violent crimes, rapes, murders could have been prevented if the arrestee law had been in place sooner. It shows this isn't just about solving old crimes, it's about preventing future ones.
I think the most interesting examples are the ones that show how these offenders are actually caught.
You're right. Because it's often not for another violent crime, it's for something seemingly unrelated.
Like in New York, a guy gets arrested for a drunk driving felony. They swab him.
And boom. His profile hits on 3 separate rape and homicide cases, some of them more than 20 years old.
Which shows you why limiting collection to just murder or rape arrests doesn't work.
It doesn't. Or look at Florida. A suspect gets picked up on felony drug charges. His DNA solves a 25-year-old murder. The net has to be wide.
And the state-level data is just as compelling. Nevada passed its law in 2014.
And since then, they've put over 61,000 samples into CODIS. And those samples have led to matches in over 100 sexual assaults, 500 burglaries, 62 robberies, and 9 murders.
These are just abstract numbers. These are solved cases, victims getting justice.
And the federal government is still supporting this through programs like the CODIS program, which funds the prosecution side of these cases.
So it's not just about getting a hit in the database.
Right. It's about making sure that hit leads to a conviction. Since 2019, that program has helped identify 94 previously unknown suspects and resolve 83 cold cases. The entire system, from swab to courtroom, is now streamlined.
So there's no question the policy has been a massive success in terms of public safety.
But that success, as we said, comes with that huge privacy question mark hanging over it.
Which we have to come back to. I mean, this whole thing rests on a 5-4 Supreme Court decision that one of the most respected conservative justices in history called a violation of the Fourth Amendment.
The tension is always there. Public safety versus individual privacy. And it's especially tense for people who are arrested but are ultimately innocent.
Because DNA is just different from a fingerprint. You can say you're only using 13 loci now, but the potential for future use or misuse of that full genetic sample always exists.
Absolutely. And the core of the privacy argument is that you're taking the sample from someone who is, by law, presumed innocent. To the dissenters in King, keeping the DNA of innocent people in a federal database was just fundamentally wrong.
So for this entire system to remain constitutional, there has to be a foolproof way to protect the innocent.
And that mechanism is mandatory expungement.
It's the legal safeguard. The whole balance depends on it.
It's the linchpin. The rules have to be crystal clear. If you were arrested and swabbed, but never convicted, your DNA has to be completely destroyed. The New Mexico regulations are a great example of how this is supposed to work.
So what are the conditions for getting your profile wiped?
Well, there are 2 main ways. First, if your arrest results in no felony charge being filed within a year, that protects people who are picked up and then quickly released.
And the second way?
That's if charges were filed, but they were later resolved through dismissal, or what's called noli prosequi, a misdemeanor conviction, or a full acquittal.
Let's clarify that term, noli prosequi.
It just means the prosecutor has decided to drop the case. Not enough evidence, a procedural problem, whatever. The key thing is the state is saying the case is over. So you have the right to get your profile purged.
So it covers basically every outcome except a felony conviction. But is it automatic?
It's not. The person has to formally request it in writing. It's a process. It goes to the Attorney General's office for review and certification.
I saw an interesting rule in there about people who jump bail. If you're arrested, released, and then you don't show up for court, your sample gets analyzed right away.
That's a public safety trigger. The thinking is that if you're actively evading the justice system, you're a higher risk, so they prioritize your sample.
But even then, if you're later caught and found not guilty,
You still have the right to request expungement. The non-conviction status is always the final word.
and once it's approved, what happens to the sample and the profile?
The law is absolute on this. It requires the complete destruction of everything, the physical sample, all the records, all identifying data. It has to be so thorough that you can never be reassociated with it. And the profile has to be removed from the federal CODIS system within 30 days.
That's the mechanism that prevents this from becoming a permanent genetic registry of innocent people.
It is. And we have to remember the other side of this coin. DNA isn't just about catching the guilty. It's one of the most powerful tools we have to exonerate the innocent.
Right. We focus on the cold hits, but it's also the best defense for the wrongly accused.
Hundreds of people have been released from prison because DNA proved their innocence. And the perfect example goes right back to the Chester Turner case.
The same case that provided the urgency for Katie's law.
The very same. Turner's DNA eventually linked him to 12 murders. But at the same time, it definitively proved that another man, David Jones, who had been convicted of 3 of those murders, was innocent.
He served 11 years in prison for crimes he didn't commit.
And DNA set him free. So the success of this whole legacy, it depends just as much on the strict, audited destruction of innocent people's data as it does on the collection itself.
So the tragic loss of Katie Sepich, this bright, vibrant life, it became the catalyst for a truly monumental change in American law enforcement.
It really did. We went from this broken patchwork system that allowed her killer to walk free for 3 years to a robust, national, federally incentivized system.
A system that was ultimately validated by the Supreme Court and now sees DNA collection upon arrest as a standard part of the booking process.
And the results are undeniable. Hundreds of cold cases solved, countless violent crimes prevented, and just as important, the wrongly convicted being set free.
But it's a permission that rests entirely on the government's promise to follow those strict expungement rules. That ability for an innocent person to have their biological blueprint completely destroyed is the only thing that keeps the system in balance.
And the data shows the utility is overwhelming. The certainty of DNA evidence can lead to quick guilty pleas, which spares families years of painful appeals. But the tension, the fundamental shift in the Fourth Amendment, that remains.
And that leads us with a final question for you to think about. If this expanded DNA database saves hundreds of lives and provides undeniable closure for victims, does that overwhelming societal benefit outweigh the very real ethical concerns about who owns the biological data of every person arrested? And given that this national standard was achieved not by a mandate but by financial incentives, a 5 or 10% funding bonus, should public safety depend on political budgeting? Or when the stakes are literally life and death, should consistent national standard simply be the law of the land?